you so much for having me. I am going to show you a bunch of different projects that I've been working on over a period of the last 4 years since I graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design.
Could you speak up?
Yeah, sure. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Great. And as I was just about to say, I think these things are slightly more interesting when they're more interactive. So if you have questions about anything as we go, please feel free to ask them, and that way I will know that you are not bored and sleeping. So I think what I'd like to do is introduce each series and tell you a little bit about the kind of creative and intellectual thought process behind each series, and then I'm going to play the slideshow, let you watch it, and then afterwards I'll talk a little bit about the technical aspects of how I actually did them, and you can ask sort of questions about each series then. Does that sound like a good plan? Great. All right, so this first project I did sort of directly out of school. It's a self-portrait series that's loosely based on fairy tales and children's stories. And I did it while I was working for another photographer in Maine and by the Maine Media Workshops. And I never actually thought that I would show it to anyone when I was first creating it. I didn't even know what I was doing so much. I more just sort of wanted to keep shooting while I was, working for this other photographer. And it also was sort of a bit therapeutic for me because I just graduated school. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and the world felt like a very intimidating big place. So I sort of used these pictures as sort of symbolic metaphors for the emotional state that I found myself in, as a way to kind of make sense of it. And I've always sort of been drawn to fairy tales and these stories because they really are a tool for growth and development. They're sort of a metaphorically symbolic roadmap to the kind of psychological process that everybody goes through when they grow up. And so I thought it was a really appropriate time in my life to kind of look back at these stories and look at how the characters in the stories overcame the obstacles that they approached or were presented with. So I'm gonna just play it. So I really felt like this project gave me an opportunity to express myself in a way that language couldn't for me. I couldn't really articulate how I felt during that period of time, and this sort of helped me to do that. So people ask if I'm still making self-portraits, and I think what's interesting is that I don't feel as compelled to make them right now because I think I don't have the same things to say that I did then. So just sort of from a technical standpoint, to make these pictures sort of more accessible, I think a lot of them maybe look sort of complicated and like there's a lot of production involved in them, but there really isn't. Like I said, I was living up in Maine at the time, and when I wasn't working for this other photographer, I would go for all these drives in my car, you know, just sort of to clear my head and think, and stumble upon the most beautiful locations as I would get lost in my own head, and lost literally. And I always had with me in my trunk my little Dynalite kit with the Road series that has, it's like one case and it's very portable, and a suitcase full of dresses and props and a tripod and my camera, so that whenever I found these places that were interesting to me, I could stop and make a self-portrait. So a lot of people wonder how I look so calm in those pictures when I have been running back and forth with the timer. And the secret is to hold your breath. No, I have a wireless remote that I used for a lot of them, and one sort of involving water or far distances. I instilled the help of very nice relatives and friends and strangers off the street to push the button for me. The nice thing about shooting digital, I am a Canon 5D Mark II kind of girl, is I could, you know, sort of get my framing, my composition, know what I wanted to shoot, and have it all there in front of me. So I took a lot of the sort of guesswork out of it, and a bit of the surprise, I guess, for those that like film. But this this project really sort of got me thinking about why take pictures. You know, like what is the point, is what I want to communicate, and I teach a lot of classes on like sort of creativity and inspiration. And one of the first things you go into is this idea of your artistic roots, like where you come from, that drives sort of who you are and what you're interested in. And I have to attribute quite a bit of the type of work that I make from how I grew up. My mom is here. This is the first lecture she's been to ever. And I have 4 younger sisters. And I have to say that sort of growing up with her sort of fantastic style of fantasy and whimsy and reading us fairy tales, she used to take us out of school to go see the circus tents being raised, or to go to yodeling festivals. I missed a lot of high school, and I think that that was a good thing because I actually think that that sort of teaches you to kind of like conform and think of, you know, like there's one problem to one solution for every problem, and to have a kind of like very regurgitative view of the world. So I think that growing up, having these like sort of fantastical birthday parties where everything was set up, everything was thought of, you know, sort of gave me this idea that you could create the world the way you wanted it to be, that you could make things beautiful regardless of what else was going on around you, and that sort of, and that magical things were possible. So I think that that's really been a huge influence in a lot of the projects that I choose to pursue. For example, the next one I want to show you is a still life project of dolls that I did sort of at the same time simultaneously with the self-portraits, because I find that I always like to have a still life project and a people project at the same time, for when you get sick of people not showing up or talking back to you, to have something that's quiet and very easily manipulated is very...
Questions?
Yeah, please.
On your first presentation, you talked about expressing yourself, or wanting
Sure.
to express yourself. Were you thinking about an audience at the time? Or you?
Not initially. And I think that that's an interesting question, because as I started showing this work, I think that the pictures did become more self-conscious and sort of more in response to feedback that I had gotten on it. Like, for example, that narcissist picture, the one where I'm looking in the water, I did directly after I had just shown a bunch of pictures to a colleague of mine, and he told me that they were self-indulgent and narcissistic, and I was just a pretty girl in a dress running around in the woods. You know, and that it didn't, you know, that there was no substance to it. And I started looking at it and saying, well, you know, maybe that's a good point. And then the sort of argument with yourself happens, like, isn't all art sort of self-indulgent and narcissistic? And, you know, sort of why put out anything? And I don't necessarily have an answer to that question.
Although you need to get a second opinion.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, it's an interesting question. I think I started trying to make them about more specific stories in my life, because I read this great Jung quote that said, like, the most personal, that which is the most personal is also the most universal. So I found the more that I related them to particular things that were happening in my life, the more, I guess, the emotion of them carried through, and sort of the atmosphere of how I was feeling. Yes?
I think one of the major themes in fairy tales is usually the adolescent person is going out into the world
Yeah.
to conquer the whatever, and then is able to come home again.
And I love the lessons in it.
I don't see narcissism at all. I see it as a journey.
Yeah, it's like an epic quest. But I love the lessons in it, and I think that they're really relevant today, and that a lot of kids are missing out on not getting these lessons, as they're watered down for the programs that are being put out now. But the idea that, you know, you go out there and you try, and it doesn't always work, you know, and sometimes it doesn't work twice, you know, but if you're persevering and you stay true to yourself, you know, you will live happily ever after. You know, that you can't take shortcuts, you know, and you can't live this existence that's a partial, you know, you have to be an authentic, well-rounded person. You know, it's not enough to just admit what your flaws are, you have to get over them. So I think that there's a lot of really valuable things in there.
With regard to the snow scene.
Yes, it was very cold.
Okay. You didn't scan it. You didn't take a picture of the landscape and then.
No, I was out there, but I did take out some footprints in Photoshop. I mean, I went the far way around to keep the front clean.
What is the time span that took this picture?
They started in 2007, and the last one, actually that one at the end with the...
Chronologically?
No, they're not chronological, but the last one is the last one I took, which I thought was kind of interesting, because that one, where the other ones felt more sort of passive and like a sort of passive searching, this one, the last one I did, felt more like a journey, like more quest-like, more active.
They were emotionally different. So when was
Yeah.
the last time?
The last one was in 2010. No, it's really interesting just for me to like look at kind of the beginning to the end and what changed and stuff like that. Any other questions? Okay, let's look at some. So this is a still life project of vintage dolls that are from the 1800s. They belong to a woman in Maine. And I was sort of really interested in the idea of like childhood and nostalgia and the way you remember things and the way you're sort of supposed to be as a child, and the idea of collections I find like really fascinating, like the way people obsessively collect things and what they choose to have in their collections and what they leave out. I also really love the history aspect of it, the idea that these dolls belonged to children that are now grown up or passed away or dead, that they had this whole sort of like life and history. And my sister did some poems for them, which are excellent, which you will see. So I really wanted to document them in a way that made them still feel animated, but not put them into a scene that would then create a new narrative. Like, I really wanted it to be just about the doll and the history that it had gone through, and like really being able to focus on like the clothing that was slightly worn and torn, and the years, what the years have basically done to these dolls. So I thought that photographing them on white would be sort of too sterile and product-like. But I thought that black would give them sort of this sense of eerie mystery, that they'd be sort of like jewel-like in them. So these are all done on a scanner to really focus on the detail of the clothing, and it gives it that shallow depth of field and that really even light. Anybody have any questions about that one?
Where did you get the words?
The words, my sister wrote those. My younger sister, she's amazing. Okay. So I left Maine with these two projects and sort of came back to New York and started exhibiting this work. And as it got more and more attention, I started getting contacted for commissions, and it started with sort of book covers or illustrating editorial magazine articles, like on sleep and dreaming, surprisingly enough. Bless you. So this started maybe about 2 years ago, and this has really become sort of a big focus now, is working commercially and sort of taking the idea of concept-based photography and idea-based photography to create these sort of like narrative, whimsical images. So this first series I'm going to show you is an ad campaign for a really interesting chandelier designer based out of the UK. And this was sort of my first experience really working collaboratively with somebody else, which creatively, fortunately, was so fulfilling because I found this person that was so on my wavelength, sort of creatively, to the point where we finish each other's sentences. So this body of work that we've made together now over the course of 2 years has really been incredible, as it's pictures that I would have never been able to make by myself, and images that would never have existed if the two of us hadn't sort of come together and had these like amazing brainstorming sessions and worked so in sync. What I really like about her work that I feel is similar to my work is the way it sort of straddles the line between art and design, or art and functional things. Like, I feel like my advertising work sort of straddles the line between being commercial and fine art based at the same time, because it still really feels a lot like my vision even when I'm working commercially, because I'm very active in the sort of concept and execution, you know, obviously the execution of the pictures. So this is a pony rawhide chandelier. And the thing that I really like about a lot of this stuff too is that it looks very photoshopped and very high production, but it's actually not. This chandelier is actually hung off of fishing wire, off a pole that's just off frame and higher, and like one of the legs was taken out, and this was shot during a storm. So the ponies were literally flying around and knocked this poor child over, who I think is now traumatized for life after this shoot. But one of those spontaneous, lucky things that happen that give you sort of a gift that I don't know that you could necessarily replicate. A lot of my work is also using the studio lights, but bringing them outside and blending the natural light and the studio lights to give a sort of very surreal, sort of fantasy look to them that maybe isn't necessarily consciously recognizable. Like, I don't want people to notice my lighting, I just want them to be involved in the story. So this is just one big octagon bank, and then cutting out some of the natural light with a filter so that the storm clouds are even more ominous than they were. This is, she uses a lot of taxidermy and found objects, and another thing I think is really interesting is that she has sort of a real intellectual reason for all of the materials that she uses, almost like in a symbolic way. So I feel like we're very much on the same plane with that. This, another happy accident having to do with my gear. This is the second shot that I put off because the first one, my lights recycled, beeped really high pitch, that recycling beep, and all the dogs looked over. So I don't know that I could ever get this again. So I mean, I really do like the spontaneousness of working with animals in particular and children, because I find them very challenging, but also super rewarding because it's not anything that could ever happen again. It's the one moment that was created and it's frozen there and you can't do it again. It's a pigeon chandelier. She really wanted, you know, she's like, my work's really unusual. I really want narrative images. So the challenge sort of creatively in our brainstorming was like, how do you almost create characters out of these lamps, and what do they represent, and what is the feeling of them, and how can I translate that into something that's interesting as an image and also works as an ad?
So how did you come up with this idea of a pack of dogs?
The pack of dogs. So when I was first talking to her about coming over, because she lives in Devon in the UK, and I had read this like blog post that a friend of mine who was interested in interior design had posted on Facebook, and it was a picture about this designer, and it had a duck, taxidermy duck with a light bulb in its mouth, and I was like, whoever made this needs to be friends with me. So I emailed, I didn't know who I was emailing, just saying like, I love your work, and would you be interested in loaning me some pieces for a shoot that I want to do? She got back to me right away. She's like, I've been meaning to have my stuff photographed. I'll be in New York, you know, in 2 months for Design Week. Would you like to meet then? So we really like sort of stroke of luck met and got along right away. And so when I was planning on coming over, she's like, well, I live in Devon and it's kind of cool. Here are all the things I have access to. There's a South Devon hunt. I have hot air balloons. I have a pig farm. I have, and I'm going like, jackpot, right? So it really was a question of like, okay, so we have all these locations and these are all the friends she has that are there. It was sort of like pooling all your resources on flashcards and mixing up like what would work together. Like, so for this picture, for example, it's funny how well things work out. So this farmer was waiting for us to shoot to send the pigs to market. So I was like, oh, it's like literally their last supper. And yeah. And the chandeliers are actually taken from some sanctuary part of a church processional, the thing that they yeah. So the chandelier is made out of that. So it already had this sort of like religious connotation to it. So we sort of just built upon that. And wouldn't it be funny if they were eating donuts?
I need those chandeliers.
Yeah, they're beautiful. So, but I like that the fact that the product doesn't like hit you over the head, that you're more involved in the story of what's happening, and I think that you remember it longer, and I think that that's what makes really successful advertising, more so that the image sticks in your head for a long period of time. And so she says, I have a friend that has a hot air balloon. I'm like, well, let's hang a chandelier off the bottom of it, because why not? And then you sort of think about, you know, what stories do you know that that correlate to hot air balloons. So Phileas Fogg, obviously traveling around the world 100 and, what is it, in 60 days? 80 days. 80 days. Yes. So that was the concept behind this one. And basically the hot air balloon was tied to 3 minivans in a field. So the ropes are taken out in post-production, but that way we were able to have relative control over this thing that was moving up and down. And then it's lit very similarly to the original pony picture, where it's one very large light source as sort of, I think the light stand was on top of a car to get it to actually hit. And then we shot at sunrise, so we didn't have to worry about too much natural light. This chandelier is actually literally made out of rusty saw blades, and is an insurance nightmare. But the concept development part, I think, is really the most important part of these pictures, and all of the elements kind of come together after the fact. You sort of do your sort of little production list of, okay, what do I need to get if I want to make it look like a girl's being sawed in half? All right, I need a girl. What is she going to be wearing? She needs to look like a performer. Okay, what is she going to be on so that she looks like she's being sawed in half? We need to find a table.
Tetanus shot.
Tetanus shot. Yes. And then it's really just about the angling and the lighting to create mood, because this is done in like the showroom of a gallery right before we were about to have a group exhibition.
So do you do all of the styling and all of the budgeting and all of the, find all these props yourself?
It depends
Staff?
on the project. Like for this particular project, between her and I, there's very limited budget for it because she's an artist my age. She's starting her own business. It's very difficult. So for a lot of these, it's just me and her. I didn't even have an assistant. But for some of the ones that you'll see later, there are whole teams involved, where you have a hair and makeup person, stylist, wardrobe producer, sort of stuff like that. But this is sort of one of the first projects that I did with very little money. We paid all of the actors in bottles of wine. So this is another example of a sort of technical happy accident. This is done in Bodmin Jail, which is the 5th most haunted place in England. And the pigeon chandelier took much longer than we thought it was going to actually assemble and run the scaffolding through this prison space. So by the time it was ready, my lighting plan that I had totally fell apart. Because it was really beautiful when we'd walked in there in the morning and all this nice like dappled light was coming in, and I had this whole idea for this picture, and then it was dark. So I'm like trying to light this space, and I don't have enough gear with me to light the whole thing, and it's looking like kind of flat and really boring. And then fortunately my lights didn't fire, and this picture came up. And I thought, maybe we don't need to light this. Because with a lot of these, what I had to do was drag a lot of the ambience so that you're getting the glow of the lights while still seeing the space, and then I'm really filling in the detail with my main light source. So,
So this is just a chandelier light?
Yeah. And I think it looks so much better than the ones that I tried to light. Foghorns. No, but all of these I think have been sort of the most challenging things to light and have been a really good learning experience, like being able to balance and make it moody and still show the glow of the light bulb so that you could really see what was going on, but still have something that feels very atmospheric. I just say that the night before we were shooting this picture, these are squirrel wall sconces. I really didn't have any idea what we were going to do, and I fell asleep, and in the middle of the night, I had this dream where I remembered that in my bedroom when I was 10, there was an illustration of 2 children in the woods, and there was a sign that said, "Beware of the goblins," and there were little fairies on all of the branches. So as soon as I woke up, I called my parents. I think it was like 5 in the morning their time, and I was like, "You have to take your BlackBerry and take a picture of this picture that was in my room and send it to me so I can show Alex so we can do this picture." And of course they did, and it worked out really well. So just again, going back to that artistic roots, like I'm remembering this picture that I saw when I was 10 in my room, and it created a concept for a picture. 5, maybe I was 5, yeah. Blacksmith bellows. So these are the actual chandeliers. They're made out of the old bellows. And real live blacksmith, very good sport. He did look really nervous when I asked him to take his shirt off. He was like, because he was like a real British, guy. But I love the sparks in this picture. And so this is done in 2 exposures, actually. One to get the light on him and the outside of the bevels, and then another one to get the fire and the sparks that are flying. And then because I'm on a tripod and nothing was moving, it laid on top of each other in Photoshop very easily. This one, I remember looking at I guess they're a pair of old prosthetic legs that she's turned into a chandelier. And I remember looking at it and being like, wow, that looks like a giant version of those things that you draw with when you're little. And Alex in the return in this conversation is like, oh, well, what if there was an army of them building a big one? So this was really fun to set up. Very cooperative models in this one. Then this series was done for a hat designer, and it is based on Edward Gorey's children's book, The Gashley Come Chinese, where a child dies for every letter of the alphabet and the whole thing rhymes. So the challenge in this one, which was really interesting, was that I had these line illustrations, these black and white illustrations that I was basing the pictures of. So it became sort of a scavenger hunt to find the locations and wardrobes and props that looked like the illustrations in the book. But this was really interesting to sort of have like the composition already laid out for you. Was a really nice exercise in like getting specific details correct. And then also trying to light it in a way that looked slightly illustrative. Like I didn't want it to look super three-dimensional, but still wanted it to have sort of like the ominous mood to it.
Are these people finding you on their own, or are you represented?
They're finding me on their own. And I mean, I do a bit of marketing myself, but most of it has actually been sort of word of mouth kind of introductions, or meeting people at events and saying, oh, what do you do? And showing my work, and they're being like, oh, I would love to work on this with you. I've been looking for somebody to shoot this for me. Yeah.
How did you get started in the first place? We've heard since Maine, but we've
Since
before Maine.
Before Maine, I was at the Savannah College of Art and Design in Georgia, and I have a photography degree from there. But I took my first photo class at Simon's Rock which is part of Bard in Maine. I was getting a liberal arts degree there, and I took a photo class to fill an elective, actually because I had a crush on a boy and we were camera partners. And that didn't work out, but I fell in love with photography immediately. I mean, I can still very vividly remember watching, you know, a prank come up in the darkroom and thinking, this is really like magic, you know. So that was sort of what hooked me right away. And I think the thing that's interesting is even then in the very beginning, I never wanted to just walk around and photograph what was around me. In the very beginning, I was still setting things up in my room, or I was taking all my sisters out and their friends and making them wear like sheets, like togas, like Greek goddesses. I mean, they're horrible pictures, but the concepts and the sort of ideas and the themes that I was drawn to were from the beginning, which I didn't really put together until actually recently, like looking back at my student work. That there's a very strong, like sort of consistent line from the beginning, that it was never for me about like, it's never even really about photography. It was more about the chance to explore things I was interested in and to go on scavenger hunts to find things and, you know, to make these little worlds. That was always like the part of the process that was the most interesting to me. So this was a campaign done for a hotel in Dubai, where they, again, wanted this sort of like fantasy lifestyle, like very opulent, atmospheric portrayal of their hotel as opposed to sort of sterile interior shots. So I was really just tasked with making this kind of like fantastical, elegant, luxurious world that would represent their brand and show off the space while still giving the idea of a suggested narrative. And I have to say, with the way they build things so big there, it was very difficult to make like a fashion story while showing the sort of entirety of the space and the sort of lushness of it. Oh, and this one, I just got back from Thailand, and this is a shoot I did there with elephants, which was on my bucket list of photography. So, this is my most recent, just finished project. So now that I've crossed this off, I need a new goal for photography. And this I did in the islands in Thailand, Monkey Feast. And it's actually now sparking a brand new project that I'm going to start on animal feasts that will be sort of similar to the pigs and that monkey one. So I always like to have the still life thing going at the same time. And this is sort of in between still life. These are live birds that I photographed in Burlington, New Jersey. And they're all juxtaposed in front of wallpaper. And my goal was, I was really thinking about those like optical illusions and paradoxes. And I really just wanted the birds to sort of blend into the wallpaper and be very optically confusing. So I hope it's successful. And also this was just kind of a fun project because I think working commercially can get really stressful, you know, like trying to coordinate all the people and schedules and budgets. So I wanted something that was just fun, and I get such a kick out of this project. It makes me laugh. These birds are such hams. They like really posed for the camera. So I hope you think this is as funny as I do. Otherwise you're gonna be bored. basically, if I was a bird, there are two soft boxes straight across, so they're canceling any shadows. So they're just lighting the background, but it's not throwing any shadows on it. And then I had one light in the front just to give a little bit of contrast to the birds, because otherwise they look too flat and you couldn't see the detail of their feathers. So it's sort of balancing those three things.
What angle were the two side saws from?
They were like sort of straight perpendicular to the, like going straight across.
So you went to some bird?
So I went to a bird store. And I set up in their lobby. They didn't quite know what to make of me. I want to photograph all your birds. So I made a trade with them. I said, I'll also photograph the birds all on white for you for your website, if you let me use them to do my project.
But I just point out that these are not still lifes, they're portraits.
That's true. That's why I said it's sort of an in-between still life project. It's some easier to work with than others. Especially a few of them we were told had clip wings and they didn't, so that ate up like a chunk of time trying to get it back in the cage. And I have a very good friend that was helping me that sacrificed, some flesh, some forearm flesh for some of these parrots, which are really like monster birds.
So did you just bring like piles and piles of wallpaper?
So I went to a wallpaper outlet store in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I went through their scrap pile and basically came home with like 100 sample pieces of wallpaper. And so I would lay them all out on the floor, and as the bird came in, I'd like try and match the color to the wallpaper background. And I had set up like one of those magnetic whiteboards in the back so that I could just magnetize the wallpaper up to it and then take it off to shoot the white, so that I would have both for the bird people. That's all I have to show you.
For more information, please visit us online, give us a call, or stop by our New York City Superstore. You can also connect with us on the web.